Cornell Law School. U.C.C. Article 2A, Leases, Part 5. Default. B. Default by lessor. Paragraph 2A-508. Lessee's remedies. 1. If a lessor fails to deliver the goods in conformity to the lease contract, Section 2A-509, or repudiates the lease contract, Section 2A-402, or lessee rightfully rejects the goods, Section 2A-509, or justifiably revokes acceptance of the goods, Section 2A-517, then with respect to any goods involved, and with respect to all of the goods, if under an installment lease contract the value of the whole lease contract is substantially impaired, Section 2A-510, the lessor is in default under the lease contract and the lessee may, A. Cancel the lease contract, Section 2A-505, 1. B. Recover so much of the rent and security as has been paid and is just under the circumstances. C. Cover and recover damages as to all goods affected whether or not they have been identified to the lease contract, Sections 2A-518 and 2A-520, or recover damages for non-delivery, Sections 2A-519 and 2A-520. D. Exercise any other rights or pursue any other remedies provided in a lease contract. 2. If a lessor fails to deliver the goods in conformity to the lease contract or repudiates the lease contract, the lessee may also, A. If the goods have been identified, recover them, Section 2A-522, or B. In a proper case, obtain specific performance or replevy the goods, Section 2A-521. 3. If a lessor is otherwise in default under a lease contract, the lessee may exercise the rights and pursue the remedies provided in the lease contract, which may include a right to cancel the lease, and in Section 2A-519, 3. 4. If a lessor has breached a warranty, whether express or implied, the lessee may recover damages, Section 2A-519, 4. 5. On rightful rejection or justifiable revocation of acceptance, a lessee has a security interest in goods in the lessee's possession or control for any rent and security that has been paid and any expenses reasonably incurred in their inspection, receipt, transportation, and care and custody, and may hold those goods and dispose of them in good faith and in a commercially reasonable manner, subject to Section 2A-527, 5. 6. Subject to the provisions of Section 2A-407, a lessee, on notifying the lessor of the lessee's intention to do so, may deduct all or any part of the damages resulting from any default under the lease contract from any part of the rent still due under the same lease contract. Paragraph 2A-509. Lessee's rights on improper delivery. Rightful rejection. 1. Subject to the provisions of Section 2A-510 on default in installment lease contracts, if the goods or the tender or delivery fail in any respect to conform to the lease contract, the lessee may reject or accept the goods or accept any commercial unit or units and reject the rest of the goods. 2. Rejection of goods is ineffective unless it is within a reasonable time after tender or delivery of the goods and the lessee seasonably notifies the lessor. Paragraph 2A-510. Installment lease contracts. Rejection and default. 1. Under an installment lease contract, a lessee may reject any delivery that is non-conforming if the non-conformity substantially impairs the value of that delivery and cannot be cured, or the non-conformity is a defect in the required documents. But if the nonconformity does not fall within subsection 2, and the lessor or the supplier gives adequate assurance of its cure, the lessee must accept that delivery. 2. Whenever nonconformity or default with respect to one or more deliveries substantially impairs the value of the installment lease contract as a whole, there is a default with respect to the whole. But the aggrieved party reinstates the installment lease contract as a whole if the aggrieved party accepts a non-conforming delivery without seasonably notifying of cancellation, or brings an action with respect only to past deliveries, or demands performance as to future deliveries. Paragraph 2A-511. Merchant lessee's duties as to rightfully rejected goods. 1. Subject to any security interest of a lessee, Section 2A-5085. If a lessor or a supplier has no agent or place of business at the market of rejection, a merchant lessee, after rejection of goods in his or her possession or control, shall follow any reasonable instructions received from the lessor or the supplier with respect to the goods. In the absence of those instructions, a merchant lessee shall make reasonable efforts to sell, lease, or otherwise dispose of the goods for the lessor's account if they threaten to decline in value speedily. Instructions are not reasonable if on-demand indemnity for expenses is not forthcoming. 2. If a merchant lessee, subsection 1, or any other lessee, section 2A-512, disposes of goods, he or she is entitled to reimbursement either from the lessor or the supplier out of the proceeds for reasonable expenses of caring for and disposing of the goods, and, if the expenses include no disposition commission, to such commission as is usual in the trade, or if there is none, to a reasonable sum not exceeding 10% of the gross proceeds. 3. In complying with this section or section 2A-512, the lessee held only to good faith. Good faith conduct hereunder is neither acceptance or conversion nor the basis of an action for damages. 4. A purchaser who purchases in good faith from a lessee pursuant to this section or section 2A-512 takes the goods free of any rights of the lessor and the supplier even though the lessee fails to comply with one or more of the requirements of this article. Paragraph 2A-512. Lessee's duties as to rightfully rejected goods. 1. Except as otherwise provided with respect to goods that threaten to decline in value speedily, section 2A-511, and subject to any security interest of a lessee, section 2A-5085. A. The lessee, after rejection of goods in the lessee's possession, shall hold them with reasonable care at the lessor's or the supplier's disposition for a reasonable time after the lessee's seasonable notification of rejection. B. If the lessor or the supplier gives no instructions within a reasonable time after notification of rejection, the lessee may store the rejected goods for the lessor's or the supplier's account or ship them to the lessor or the supplier or dispose of them for the lessor's or the supplier's account with reimbursement in the manner provided in section 2A-511. But, c. The lessee has no further obligations with regard to goods rightfully rejected. 2. Action by the lessee pursuant to subsection 1 is not acceptance or conversion. Paragraph 2A-513. Cure by lessor of improper tender or delivery, replacement. 1. If any tender or delivery by the lessor or the supplier is rejected because non-conforming and the time for performance has not yet expired, the lessor or the supplier may seasonably notify the lessee of the lessor's or the supplier's intention to cure and may then make a conforming delivery within the time provided in the lease contract. 2. If the lessee rejects a non-conforming tender that the lessor or the supplier had reasonable grounds to believe would be acceptable with or without money allowance, the lessor or the supplier may have a further reasonable time to substitute a conforming tender if he or she seasonably notifies the lessee. Paragraph 2A-514. Waiver of lessee's objections. 1. In rejecting goods, a lessee's failure to state a particular defect that is ascertainable by reasonable inspection precludes the lessee from relying on the defect to justify rejection or to establish default. A. If, stated seasonably, the lessor or the supplier could have cured it, section 2A-513, or B. Between merchants if the lessor or the supplier after rejection has made a request in writing for a full and final written statement of all defects on which the lessee proposes to rely. 2. A lessee's failure to reserve rights when paying rent or other consideration against documents precludes recovery of the payment for defects apparent on the face of the documents. Paragraph 2A-515. Acceptance of goods. 1. Acceptance of goods occurs after the lessee has had a reasonable opportunity to inspect the goods and a. the lessee signifies or acts with respect to the goods in a manner that signifies to the lessor or the supplier that the goods are conforming or that the lessee will take or retain them in spite of their non-conformity, or b. the lessee fails to make an effective rejection of the goods. Section 2A-5092. 2. Acceptance of a part of any commercial unit is acceptance of that entire unit.